The night before he disappeared, Nolan Wells cooked salmon for his family. Think about that for a moment. An 18-year-old athlete, a multi-sport star at Ocean Springs High School, a young man who'd gone on to play football at Southwest Mississippi Community College, and on his last night at home, he did something ordinary, something loving, something that said, "I'm here, I'm present, I care." He stood in his family's kitchen, he prepared a meal, he sat with the people who loved him most, and none of them knew it was the last time. That's the thing about moments like this. They don't announce themselves. They don't come with warning signs or dramatic music. They just happen. Ordinary, unremarkable, until they become the thing you replay in your mind for the rest of your life. You're part of this story now. You're sitting here, listening to me tell you about a young man who cooked salmon for his family and never came home. And before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Something that might feel uncomfortable. If you watch this entire story and still walk away without doing the one thing that takes 2 seconds, the thing that tells the world you care about what happened to Nolan Wells, ask yourself what that says. Ask yourself what it means when you invest your time, your attention, your emotions, and then you leave without committing to the next chapter. Because the only way stories like this continue to be told is if people like you choose to care. Not when it's convenient, not when it's trending, but now. The world looked away from Horn Island for days. Don't look away now. July 4th, 2024. Horn Island, a barrier island 10 miles off Mississippi's Gulf Coast. No facilities, no staff, no cell service, just sand, water, and the kind of isolation that can feel like freedom, or like a trap, depending on what happens after you arrive. Nolan Wells traveled there by boat with a group of friends. They'd been drinking since late morning. It was a holiday trip. A last outing before summer ended, according to the friends who were there. A young woman was on the island too, the one who would become central to the story, the one who would later become what investigators call a person of interest, though no one has ever been officially named that way. Nolan spent time with her that day. And then something happened, something that the friends who returned to the mainland haven't fully explained, something that the young woman hasn't publicly addressed. Something that the people who were there that day seem to remember differently depending on who you ask. At some point, Nolan stayed behind. The rest of the group got back on the boat and headed for the mainland, and Nolan Wells was never seen alive again. You've come this far with us. You've already invested your attention, your curiosity, your willingness to sit with a story that doesn't have an easy ending. That investment matters. It means something. It means you're part of the jury now. And juries don't get to walk away without delivering a verdict. Subscribe. Not for us, for Nolan, for every victim who never got to tell their own story. Around 4 p.m. on July 4th, a distress call was made. Not for Nolan. Not yet. The boat that had carried the group back toward the mainland had a bilge pump failure. It was taking on water. The passengers called a private towing company for help. Everyone aboard confirmed they were safe. Nolan was not on that boat. He had already chosen to stay behind, planning to come back to the mainland later with a different group. That was the plan. That was what everyone believed would happen. He never made it onto that different boat. And what happened to that plan has never been explained. The distress call audio exists. It's the clearest documented account we have of Nolan's final hours. But it doesn't answer the question that haunts everyone who hears this story. Why did an 18-year-old athlete, a young man with a future ahead of him, a son who cooked salmon for his family the night before he left, never make it back? The friends who were on that boat have been interviewed. More than 60 witnesses have spoken to investigators. 3 friends who were with Nolan that day have given their accounts. And still, no one has been arrested. Still, the cause of death hasn't been confirmed. Still, the family is waiting. Imagine that. Imagine being Nolan's mother. Imagine the call, the confusion, the hope that somehow, some way, your son would walk through the door. Imagine the sinking realization that he wasn't coming home. Imagine the days that followed, the pleading, the waiting, the silence from officials who seemed in no hurry to act. Christine Wansley posted online pleading for help the night her son went missing. After his body was found, she said this wasn't how she'd wanted the world to meet her son. A mother's grief is not a soundbite. It's not a headline. It's a wound that never closes. And yet, She has had to watch while the investigation moved at a pace that can only be described as unhurried. If this case stays with you, if the image of that mother stays with you, then you already know what you need to do next. Subscribe, because she deserves to know that her son's story reached people who cared. Because Nolan deserves to be remembered, and we can't do that without you. Day 11. 11 days since Nolan Wells disappeared. 11 days since his body was found in the water off the island's northwestern tip. 11 days of waiting while investigators interviewed witnesses, gathered evidence, and declined to name any suspects. Sheriff John Ledbetter had this to say on Monday: "I'm not going to be rushed. Not going to be rushed. A young man is dead. A mother is grieving. A community is demanding answers. And the sheriff is telling them to be patient. Let me be clear about something. No one is asking for a rush. But 11 days is not a rush. 11 days is enough time to do the basic work of an investigation. 11 days is enough time to question the people who were with Nolan in his final hours. The friends who were on the boat with him that day. The young woman he spent time with on the island. The people who know what happened in those missing hours. What have they been told? What have they been asked? What have they been allowed to say? Traston Shepherd, one of the friends on the trip, has said publicly that he believes the truth will come out either way, whether that means someone hurt Nolan or it turns out to have been a tragic accident. Either way, that's not the language of someone who knows what happened. That's the language of someone who is waiting, just like everyone else, for the official story to land. The district attorney, Angel Myers McRath, didn't make a public statement for days. Not until someone called her out. Not until the pressure built. And then, suddenly, she was working alongside the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. She met with Nolan's parents for the first time. She told them she would present the case to a grand jury once the investigation was complete. A step in the right direction. But is it a step in the right direction because someone finally asked the right questions? Or was it always going to happen this way? The family has been calling for transparency all along. They've been asking for answers. They've been asking for the kind of urgency that would be automatic if the roles were reversed. If 3 young black men had returned from an island and 1 young white man had been left behind, would the investigation have moved faster? We all know the answer to that question. But let's be careful here. Let's be precise, because this case has drawn attention far beyond Mississippi for exactly that reason. The Congressional Black Caucus has called for a full and transparent investigation. Mississippi Congressman Benny Thompson has done the same. Ben Crump and Reverend Al Sharpton have held press conferences with the family. Crump invoked Mississippi's history directly, citing the killing of Emmett Till. That's the weight this case carries, and it's why you can't look away now. This case was ignored for days. A subscription says you won't let that happen again. Carlos Moore has been posting nightly updates like the one we're examining. He's a civil rights attorney, a former Mississippi municipal judge, a current congressional candidate in Georgia's 13th district, and he has personal reasons for being skeptical of this investigation. In 2019, his cousin, Tusha Demon Sims, was shot and killed by a Moss Point police officer while running away. Moore represented the family. The same district attorney now handling the Wells case, Angel Myers McRath, presented that case to a grand jury. No indictment came of it. Different case, different facts. But the personal history is there. The memory of a grand jury that looked at the evidence and found nothing worth charging. The memory of a system that sometimes fails the people it's supposed to protect. That's the lens Moore is looking through. And he's not wrong to be skeptical. I had the unfortunate experience of meeting the Dear McRath back in 2019. Let's make sure she's not going to do another sham presentation to the grand jury. Those are strong words. But they come from a place of experience, a place of loss, a place of watching the system work slowly, deliberately, while families wait and wonder if anyone will ever be held accountable. The regular saying is that you can indict a ham sandwich with enough evidence. If a grand jury doesn't indict, it usually means the prosecutor didn't want an indictment. That's the concern Moore is raising, and it's a valid one. Because here's the thing about the Nolan Wells case. If it was an accidental drowning, a tragic accident with no suspicious circumstances, it wouldn't need to go to a grand jury at all. The DA could make that call herself. She could close the case and move on. But she hasn't. She's preparing to present it to a grand jury, which means there's something not clean in the milk, something that doesn't add up, something that investigators believe needs to be reviewed by a panel of citizens. If this moment landed, if the weight of that realization landed, then you know what's being asked of you. Every person who subscribes is a witness, and witnesses are what the dead deserve. The body was found, the autopsy was conducted, but not by just one medical examiner. The state's chief medical examiner, Stacey Turner, performed the initial autopsy. She's the same official who examined the body of a young black man found hanging from a tree at Delta State not long ago. She did not find any foul play in that case. The family didn't trust that conclusion. They commissioned their own independent autopsy. It was partly funded by former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick. It was conducted in Washington, D.C., by a pathologist Moore describes as someone he trusts completely. You can take it to the bank, Moore said. If he says it, you can take it to the bank. 2 autopsies, 2 sets of eyes, 2 perspectives on what happened to Nolan Wells. Will be conducted by the state. One will be conducted by experts chosen by the family. That's what it has come to. That's the level of distrust. The family's independent investigators say they've been getting 50 to 100 calls a day from people who were on Horn Island, people who saw something, people who heard something, people who might know what happened in those missing hours, but the official investigation is still ongoing. The cause of death still hasn't been confirmed. The toxicology results can take weeks to come back. And in the meantime, Nolan Wells remains in limbo. Not quite an accident, not quite a crime, just a case that people are fighting over. Moore has been clear about what he thinks needs to happen next. Has the boat been seized? Have you even presented evidence to a judge to at least seize that boat for any substance? We need answers. The boat, the one that left Horn Island without Nolan, the one that had a bilge pump failure, the one that made the distress call. Where is it now? Has it been examined? Has it been secured? Or is it sitting somewhere, waiting for someone to ask the right question? I'm concerned that since no one has been officially declared to be suspects, but the case is now serious enough for the FBI to be brought in, there evidently are people still of interest that may become suspects. But they are giving them too much time. Too much freedom. Too much freedom. That's the phrase that should stop you cold. Because people with too much freedom can leave. People with too much freedom can disappear. People with too much freedom can board a plane, cross a border, and never come back. Have their passports been confiscated? Has anyone considered the flight risk? If these folks leave the country and never return, if they flee to a place where extradition is not guaranteed, that will stink to high heaven. And the people in charge would have been complicit. Every subscription is a promise that we will keep digging, that we will not let these cases go cold again. Moore helped launch 2 advocacy groups built around this case, Dads for Justice, and in response to interest from mothers following the story, Moms for Justice. It's hands off, Moore said. You don't mess with a man's kids. You don't mess with a woman's kids. We are putting Nolan in the same vein as we would our own blood kids. It's Dads for Justice, because it may be one son today, but it could easily be our son or daughter tomorrow. That's the power of this case. It's not just about Nolan Wells anymore. It's about every parent who has ever worried about their child. Every family that has ever wondered if the system would work for them. Every community that has ever felt like justice is something that happens to other people. Moore has framed the case in personal terms throughout his updates. He draws on his own experience as a father. He talks about the fear, the anger, the determination to protect your children. And he's not wrong to feel that way. Because cases like this one, when an investigation stalls and officials seem in no hurry, parents and community members often end up filling the advocacy role no one else has. They become the ones who demand answers, the ones who won't let the story fade, the ones who keep the pressure on until someone finally does their job. We are building a movement, Moore said, not a moment. That's the long game. And it's exactly the kind of movement that requires people who care enough to stay engaged. You've already proven you care. You've watched this far. You've invested your time and your attention. You've sat with the discomfort of a case that doesn't have a tidy ending. But the work isn't done. The investigation is still open. The grand jury hasn't convened. The cause of death hasn't been confirmed. And the family is still waiting. If you want to be part of the movement, if you want to be part of something bigger than any one case, there's one simple thing you can do. Subscribe, not for us, for them, for every victim who never got to tell their own story, for every mother who has to bury her child, for every community that deserves answers. Funeral services were scheduled for Monday, July 20th at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. Visitation that morning, followed by the service. Then, a repass at the Jackson County Fairgrounds. Reverend A.I. Sharpton was set to officiate. The costs were covered by Tyler Perry. Nolan's mother said she wanted it to be a celebration of her son's life. She asked anyone planning to demonstrate over the case to keep it peaceful, which she said is what her son would have wanted. A celebration. Think about that. A mother who lost her son is asking for a celebration. Not anger, not revenge, not the chaos that grief sometimes brings. Peace. That's who Nolan Wells was. That's who his family is. And they're still waiting for answers. A day after this live stream, Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves addressed the case for the first time. He said he personally knows Sheriff Ledbetter. He confirmed the state's autopsy was handled by the medical examiner's office under the Department of Public Safety. The governor weighed in. The case moved fast right afterward. But the questions remain. What happened on Horn Island? Who was with Nolan in his final hours? Why was he left behind? Why did it take 11 days to bring in the FBI? Why did the DA stay silent until someone called her out? And why, with all the evidence gathered, with all the witnesses interviewed, with all the pressure from the community, does Nolan Wells still not have the answers his family deserves? You stayed until the end. You heard his name. You heard his mother's plea. You heard the skepticism, the frustration, the determination of people who refuse to let this case go. Now do the only thing that makes sense. Subscribe, because Nolan Wells's life mattered, and we will not stop until full justice is reached. This is the part where most creators would say, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I'm not going to do that, because this isn't about me. It's not about this channel. It's not about algorithms or metrics or any of the things that usually drive content creators. This is about Nolan Wells, an 18-year-old who cooked salmon for his family and never came home. A young man who had a future, a family, a life ahead of him. A case that still doesn't have answers. The investigation is still open. The cause of death hasn't been confirmed. No suspects have been named. No charges have been filed. But the grand jury will convene. The evidence will be presented. And eventually someone will have to make a decision. Until then, the family waits. The community waits. And we wait with them. But waiting isn't enough. Waiting doesn't move the needle. Waiting doesn't put pressure on the system. Waiting doesn't tell the world that Nolan Wells's life mattered. Action does. And subscribing is action. It's a signal. It's a commitment. It's a promise that you won't look away when the next update comes. That you'll be here for the grand jury decision. That you'll remember Nolan's name long after the headlines fade. The world looked away for days. Don't look away now. If this story stayed with you, if the image of a mother burying her son stayed with you, then you already know what you need to do. Subscribe, not for us, for Nolan, for every victim who never got to tell their own story, for every family that deserves answers, for every community that needs to know that someone somewhere still cares. Because that's what justice looks like, not just in the courtroom, not just in the grand jury room, but in the moments when ordinary people decide that a life lost is not a story forgotten. You're part of this now. You're part of the movement. You're part of the reason cases like this don't get swept under the rug. So do the thing that takes 2 seconds. subscribe. And when the grand jury convenes, when the autopsy results come back, when the final chapter of this story is written, you'll be here. Because you care. And that matters more than you know. Nolan Wells, 2006 to 2024. 18 years old. Gone too soon. A son. Needs answers. We'll see you in the next one.